Commissioner Talzix Graxvorn flattened his 3 eye stalks against his skull as he stared at the datapad. You have got to be kidding me. His assistant, Junior Diplomatic Officer Pila, shifted nervously on her 4 limbs. I'm afraid not, Commissioner. The Council has formally approved the human delegation's attendance at the Deathworld Summit. Perfect. Just perfect. Talzix tossed the datapad onto his desk with enough force to make Pila flinch. Let's invite the most unpredictable species in the galaxy to a conference specifically designed to discuss the most dangerous planets in existence. What could possibly go wrong? The sarcasm in his voice was thick enough to spread on toast. Pila had worked for Commissioner Graxvorn long enough to recognize when he was building up to one of his famous tirades. They are actually quite qualified to attend, she ventured cautiously. Earth is classified as a Class 9 Deathworld. After all, Talzix snorted, a sound that involved his nasal membranes vibrating in a most undignified manner. Oh, I'm well aware of Earth's classification. What I'm questioning is the collective sanity of the Galactic Council. He began pacing, all 6 of his legs moving in perfect synchronization across his office's polished obsidian floor. Do you know what humans do for fun, Pila? He asked, not waiting for an answer. They jump out of perfectly functional aircraft. They dive into massive bodies of water filled with predators. They climb frozen mountains during storms. And those are their recreational activities. Their resilience is rather impressive, Pila admitted. Impressive? It's lunacy. Talzix threw all 4 of his arms up in exasperation. And now we are inviting their delegation to Vortex Station, where they will have access to classified information about the most lethal environments in charted space. Environments that would reduce most species to puddles of organic slurry, but which these humans will probably see as exciting vacation destinations. The commissioner's voice had risen to a near shriek by the end of his statement. He paused, composed himself, and adjusted his ceremonial collar. When are they scheduled to arrive? He asked, his tone now eerily calm. Pila checked her notes. In approximately 6 standard hours, sir. Fantastic. Talzix settled back into his hover chair. Alert Security Chief Drazik that we will need extra personnel. And for the love of the cosmic entities, make sure the bar is stocked with that awful ethanol-based swill they call a beverage. I don't want any diplomatic incidents because some human couldn't get their poison of choice. Yes, Commissioner. Anything else? Talzix's mouth parts twisted into what passed for a grimace among his species. Pray to whatever deities you believe in, Pila. We're going to need all the help we can get. 6 hours later, Talzix stood in the docking bay of Vortex Station, surrounded by a delegation of various species, all representatives of worlds that would kill most sentient life within minutes of exposure. There were the silicon-based quartz from Igneous Prime, the methane-breathing Volok from the gas giant Nebulox, and even a representative of the enigmatic Shadow Collective, whose home planet orbited so close to a neutron star that time itself bent around its surface. And yet, despite this gathering of the galaxy's most extreme evolutionary outcomes, Talzix found himself fixated on the approaching human transport vessel, which had just been cleared for docking. Remember, he hissed to the assembled dignitaries, no sudden movements. Humans are from a high-gravity world with unpredictable weather patterns and abundant predators. Their reaction times are unsettling. The docking clamps engaged with a resonant clang that Talzix felt in his exoskeleton. The airlock cycled, pressure equalized, and the doors slid open to reveal. While they were smaller than Talzix had expected, the 5 humans who stepped onto Vortex Station were a diverse bunch, varying in coloration, height, and secondary sexual characteristics. What they shared was an easy confidence that made Talzix's digestive tract clench in apprehension. Greetings, representatives of Earth, he said formally, performing the 12-point gesture of diplomatic welcome. I am Commissioner Talzix Graxvorn, Administrator of Vortex Station and Chairperson of the 87th Annual Deathworld Summit. The human at the front of the group, a female with copper-colored facial fur and pale skin dotted with small melanin concentrations, stepped forward with a smile that exposed far too many teeth for Talzix's comfort. Ambassador Josephine Vance, she said, extending a hand in the human greeting ritual, representing Earth and its colonies. These are my colleagues, Dr. Marcus Okafor, our xenobiologist, Captain Dante Jackson, our security specialist, Engineer Hiroshi Tanaka, and our diplomatic aide, Lucia Reyes. Tal Zix reluctantly placed his upper right appendage against the humans, trying not to think about the bacterial exchange that was undoubtedly occurring. "Welcome to Vortex Station," he said, withdrawing his hand as quickly as politeness allowed. "We have prepared accommodations that should approximate Earth conditions as closely as possible." Ambassador Vance's smile widened fractionally. "That's very thoughtful, Commissioner, but we are quite adaptable. Standard atmosphere and gravity will be fine." Of course it would be, Tal Zix thought sourly. Humans could probably survive in a vacuum for a few minutes if they put their minds to it. "As you wish," he said aloud. "The opening session begins in 3 hours. Until then, feel free to explore the public areas of the station. Your biometric signatures have been added to our security systems." The human called Captain Jackson, a tall male with dark skin and a muscular build, stepped forward. "Any restricted areas we should know about?" Tal Zix felt his eye stalks twitch involuntarily. Was the human already planning to breach security? "Several," he replied stiffly. "They are clearly marked, and attempting to access them will trigger alarms." "Good to know," Jackson said with a nod that could have meant anything as the humans moved away, chatting among themselves and pointing at various features of the docking bay with evident enthusiasm. Pila sidled up to Tal Zix. "They seem pleasant," she offered. "So do apex predators right before they strike," Tal Zix muttered. "Keep an eye on them, especially the security specialist. I don't trust that gleam in his ocular organs." "Yes, Commissioner." Tal Zix watched the humans disappear into the station's main concourse, a sense of foreboding settling over him like a shroud. Something was going to go wrong. He could feel it in his exoskeleton. 2 hours and 43 minutes later. Tal Zix's premonition proved accurate. "What do you mean they are in the simulation chamber?" he demanded, his voice rising to a pitch that made nearby crystalline beings vibrate in sympathy. "That area is clearly restricted. Security Chief Drazik, a hulking reptilian from a world with 3 times Earth's gravity, looked distinctly uncomfortable. They had authorization codes. Commissioner, authorization? From whom?" Drazik shifted his massive weight from one foot to another. "From you, sir." Tal Zix felt as though he'd been struck by a bolt of plasma. "I most certainly did not authorize humans to access our most sophisticated environmental simulation technology. The system says otherwise," Drazik said, showing Tal Zix a security log that indeed bore his authentication signature. "This is fabricated. Someone has hacked our systems." Tal Zix's eye stalks whirled in agitation. "How long have they been in there?" "Approximately 22 minutes, Drazik replied. "And what simulation are they running?" Drazik hesitated. "Frostbite Tundra, sir. Maximum intensity." Tal Zix felt his 3 hearts skip several beats in perfect synchronization. Frostbite Tundra was a simulation of one of the most extreme environments known to exist. A nitrogen ice wasteland swept by winds carrying particles sharp enough to cut through standard environmental suits. "We have to get them out of there immediately," he said, already moving toward the turbolifts. "They will be dying of hypothermia and lacerations by now." "This is exactly the sort of diplomatic catastrophe I was afraid of." Pila hurried after him, her slender legs a blur of motion. "Should I alert medical, sir?" "Alert everyone, and prepare my resignation while you are at it, because after 5 humans die on my watch, my career in the diplomatic corps is effectively over." The turbolift deposited them on a research level, and Tal Zix sprinted down the corridor toward the simulation chamber, Drazik and Pila struggling to keep pace. He burst through the control room doors, startling the technicians monitoring the chamber systems. "Shut it down," he ordered. "Emergency override. Authorization Grax Vorn Omega 7. The lead technician, a jellyfish-like being floating in a tank of saline solution, rippled in confusion. "But sir, they are doing so well." "What?" Talzix shouldered the technician aside and stared at the monitoring screens. What he saw defied explanation. Humans weren't dying. They weren't even in distress. They were playing. Captain Jackson and Engineer Tanaka appeared to be engaged in some sort of competition involving sliding across the ice at high velocity. Dr. Okafor was collecting samples of the nitrogen crystals, examining them with evident delight. Diplomatic aide Reyes was making what appeared to be artistic impressions in the ice using her body. And Ambassador Vance was standing in the middle of it all, face turned up to the simulated sky, catching razor-sharp ice crystals on her tongue. They were all wearing what appeared to be completely inadequate protective gear, thin outer layers that left their faces exposed to temperatures that should have frozen their fluid solid. What in the name of the cosmic entities are they doing? Talzix whispered, horrified and fascinated in equal measure. I believe the humans call it having a snow day, the technician replied. AS. If to emphasize this point, Captain Jackson launched a compressed ball of ice crystals at Dr. Okafor, hitting him squarely in the back of the head. Rather than responding with anger or pain, Okafor laughed and returned fire. How are they not dead? Pila asked, voicing the question that was screaming through Talzix's mind. Their internal body temperature appears stable, the technician said, indicating a set of biometric readings. And their outer garments contain some form of advanced insulation. They also applied a protective substance to their exposed skin. Talzix watched as Ambassador Vance executed a perfect backward flip onto a particularly smooth patch of ice, sliding gracefully across it before coming to a stop with a flourish. Should we still shut it down? Pila asked uncertainly. Talzix was saved from having to answer by a chime indicating that the simulation was ending of its own accord. The ice landscape began to dissolve, replaced by the neutral gray environment of the inactive chamber. Quick, he hissed, back to the lift. We can't let them know we were watching. They barely made it to the corridor before the chamber door slid open and the humans emerged, their faces flushed with cold and exertion, laughing and talking animatedly. That was amazing, Lucia Reyes was saying. It's just like the winters in Quebec, where my grandparents live. Colder, actually, Dr. Okafor replied, studying readings on a handheld device. And the ice crystals have a fascinating molecular structure. I have never seen naturally occurring nitrogen form these lattice patterns. They fell silent as they noticed Talzix, Drazik, and Pila standing frozen in the corridor. Commissioner, Ambassador Vance said smoothly, not a hair out of place despite having just frolicked in an environment cold enough to shatter most species on a molecular level. We were just familiarizing ourselves with your excellent research facilities. How did you get access? Talzix managed to ask, his voice barely above a whisper. Vance smiled that too many teeth smile again. Oh, one of your staff was kind enough to show us around. I hope that wasn't a problem. Before Talzix could form a coherent response, a station-wide announcement echoed through the corridors. Attention, all delegates. The opening session of the 87th Annual Deathworld Summit will commence in 15 minutes. Please proceed to the Grand Assembly Hall. We should get moving, Vance said brightly. Wouldn't want to be late for our first session. Coming, Commissioner? Talzix watched the humans walk away, their casual banter echoing off the station's walls, and felt a profound sense of unease settle over him. If this was how humans responded to one of the most lethal environments in the galaxy, treating it like a recreational activity, what other surprises did they have in store? Commissioner, Pila prompted gently. The assembly, yes, Talzix said distantly, his mind racing with implications. The assembly. Let's go. He followed the humans down a corridor, watching as they greeted other delegates with friendly waves and handshakes, apparently oblivious to the fact that they had just casually shattered several prevailing theories about carbon-based life forms and their environmental tolerances. The 87th Annual Deathworld Summit was officially underway, and Talzix had never felt less prepared for what was to come. The Grand Assembly Hall of Vortex Station was a marvel of xeno-architectural design, capable of accommodating species from across the spectrum of known life forms. Gravity, atmosphere, temperature, and lighting could all be adjusted on a section-by-section basis, allowing delegates to sit in conditions approximating their native environments while still being able to interact with one another. Talzix took his place on the elevated chairperson's platform, surveying the gathering below. Representatives from over 40 Deathworld planets filled the chamber, their forms as varied as the lethal environments that had shaped them. Floating gas bags from high-pressure worlds, crystalline entities from radiation-soaked moons, amorphous colonies of microscopic organisms from acidic swamps. And then there were the humans, sitting comfortably in standard atmospheric conditions, looking for all the world like they belonged among these evolutionary extremes. Talzix cleared his throat, activating the chamber's translation systems. Esteemed delegates, I officially call to order the 87th Annual Deathworld Summit. Standard pleasantries followed. Welcomes, acknowledgments of long journeys, recognition of first-time attendees. Throughout it all, Talzix kept finding his gaze drawn back to the human delegation, who were paying polite attention but also passing notes to each other like younglings in education pod. As is tradition, Talzix continued. We begin with the Deathworld classification update. The Galactic Survey Corps has completed assessments of 17 previously unclassified worlds this cycle. Survey Commander Vorex will present the findings. A gelatinous being oozed to the central platform, trailing cables connected to a holographic projector. Images of planets began to appear in the air above the assembly, rotating slowly to display barren wastelands, violently tectonic crusts, and atmospheres thick with toxic compounds. Charming vacation spots, Captain Jackson whispered to his colleagues, just loudly enough for Talzix's sensitive hearing to pick up. The resort on Sulfuric Delta looks particularly delightful. Engineer, Tanaka replied dryly. I have always wanted to swim in lakes of molten sulfur. Ambassador Vance shushed them, but Talzix could see the amusement in her eyes. Survey Commander Vorex was now displaying a particularly nasty-looking world with a dense, swirling atmosphere. Planet XJ, 2847, colloquially known as the Crusher. Gravity measures at 4.3 standard units. Atmosphere predominantly composed of carbon dioxide and chlorine compounds. Surface temperatures average 173 degrees standard scale. Classified as a Class 10 Deathworld, unsuitable for colonization by any known species. Dr. Okafor raised a hand. Talzix felt a surge of panic. The first session was supposed to be presentations only, with questions held until later deliberative sessions. Yes, Earth representative. Vorex burbled politely. Just a quick clarification, Okafor said. When you say unsuitable for colonization, are you accounting for advanced environmental engineering? Because those conditions aren't too far off from what we have successfully modified on Venus. A murmur ran through the assembly. Talzix felt his eye stalks go rigid with alarm. Venu? Vorex asked. One of the planets in our home system, Okafor explained. Similar atmospheric composition, slightly lower gravity, somewhat higher temperatures. We have had floating colonies in its upper atmosphere for decades, and surface installations for about 15 years now. The murmur grew louder. Talzix fought the urge to bury his face in his hands. This was exactly what he'd feared. Humans casually revealing the conditions most species considered utterly lethal were, to them, minor engineering challenges. That would be of great interest to the Survey Corps, Vorex said, clearly caught off guard. Perhaps we could discuss your techniques later? Happy to. Okafor replied with a friendly nod, apparently oblivious to the stir he'd created. The presentations continued, but Talzix could see the attention of many delegates now fixed firmly on the humans. Information was being quietly exchanged, appendages gesturing toward the Earth representatives with mixtures of curiosity, skepticism, and alarm. By the time the session ended 2 hours later, Talzix's anxiety had reached new heights. The humans had disrupted the carefully orchestrated proceedings 3 more times with helpful comments about how various lethal conditions could be mitigated or even exploited. And worse, other delegates were beginning to engage with them directly, bypassing proper diplomatic channels. As the assembly dispersed for a recess, Talzix hurried to intercept Ambassador Vance before she could be surrounded by curious representatives. "Ambassador," he said, trying to keep his tone level, "a word, if you please." Vance turned to him with that unsettling smile. "Of course, Commissioner. Is something wrong?" Talzix guided her to a relatively quiet corner of the chamber. "I understand that your species is eager to contribute, but there are protocols to these proceedings. The first session is traditionally for information sharing only, not problem solving," Vance suggested. "Disruption," Talzix corrected firmly. "Many of the delegates represent extremely conservative societies. They find unexpected interventions distressing." Vance's expression became more serious. "I apologize if we have caused any discomfort. It's just that my colleagues get excited about the possibilities. Humans are problem solvers by nature." That was precisely what worried Talzix. A species that saw Class 10 death worlds as puzzles to be solved rather than warnings to be heeded was a species that might redefine the galactic order in ways he found deeply unsettling. "Perhaps you could encourage your team to take a more observational approach for the remainder of today's sessions," he suggested. "There will be designated periods for interactive discussion tomorrow." "Of course," Vance said smoothly. "We are here to learn as much as to share." Something about her tone made Talzix doubt the sincerity of her agreement. But before he could press the point, they were interrupted by the arrival of the Quartz delegate, a towering crystalline being who moved with the grinding sound of silicon-based joints in motion. Ambassador Vance. The delegate resonated, its voice a series of harmonics that the translation system rendered into standard galactic. "I am most interested in your Dr. Okafor's mention of Venus colonization. My people have identified several worlds with similar conditions that we previously considered uninhabitable." And just like that, Vance was engaged in precisely the sort of direct diplomatic interaction Talzix had hoped to prevent. He watched helplessly as other delegates drifted over, drawn by the conversation, until the human was at the center of an impromptu gathering of some of the most powerful representatives in the assembly. "Problem?" Pila asked, appearing at his side. "Nothing short of a complete breakdown of established diplomatic procedure," Talzix replied grimly. "By the end of this summit, the humans will have bilateral agreements with half the Deathworld delegations, completely circumventing council oversight." "Would that be so terrible?" Pila asked. "The exchange of environmental adaptation technologies could benefit many worlds." Talzix fixed her with all three of his eye stalks. "And what happens when those technologies are applied to military endeavors? When species that evolved in completely separate environmental niches can suddenly project power into each other's territories? The Council's influence is based largely on our role as intermediaries between incompatible biological realities." Understanding dawned on Pila's features. "And the humans are making those realities compatible." "Precisely." Talzix watched as Captain Jackson demonstrated something on his personal device to an enthralled methane breather for Nebulox. They don't realize it yet, but they are restructuring the foundation of galactic politics with every casual conversation. The reception banquet that evening did nothing to alleviate Talzix's concerns. If anything, the informal setting only encouraged more unauthorized diplomatic exchanges. The grand dining hall had been configured to accommodate the diverse biological needs of the attendees. Separate atmospheric chambers dotted the perimeter for species that breathe compounds toxic to others. Gravity plates beneath the floor created localized fields for high-gravity species. Temperature zones range from near absolute zero to plasma-adjacent heat, and yet, despite these careful arrangements, the humans had become the gravitational center of the event. They moved freely between environmental zones, protected by what appeared to be completely inadequate personal equipment. A thin, transparent mask here, a set of weighted boots there. Engineer Tanaka was currently engaged in a drinking contest with a silicon-based life form whose natural body temperature was over 500 degrees standard. How is he not bursting into flames? Talzix muttered to Pila as they watched from a safe distance. "The humans call it thermal-resistant polymer cloth," Pila replied. "Apparently, It's standard issue for their engineers who work near their fusion reactors. Talzix's digestive sacs churned with anxiety, and the breathing apparatus filters out most toxins while allowing for verbal communication. Pila couldn't keep the admiration from her voice. Rather elegant design, actually. Elegant? It's terrifying. Talzix drained his cup of fermented algae extract, his third of the evening. Do you realize what this means? The humans have developed adaptive technologies that allow them to function in almost any environment. They can go places, meet species, establish relations that should be biologically impossible. Isn't that the point of technological advancement? Pila asked. Talzix fixed her with a withering stare from all three eye stalks. The point is managed progress, junior officer. Controlled, carefully supervised advancement that maintains the galactic balance of power. Not this chaotic biological free-for-all. Across the room, Ambassador Vance was engaged in animated conversation with the Shadow Collective representative, whose form was barely visible even in the subdued lighting of the banquet hall. The Shadow Collective were notoriously reclusive, their physiology so bizarre that most species couldn't even perceive them properly. Yet there was the human, nodding and gesturing as if chatting with an old friend. Commissioner, a voice interrupted Talzix's brooding. Are you quite well? He turned to find Dr. Okafor standing behind him, a look of what appeared to be genuine concern on his face. Perfectly fine, Talzix lied, straightening his posture, merely observing the proceedings. Fascinating gathering, isn't it? Okafor said, gazing around the room. So many evolutionary solutions to extreme conditions. I have already collected enough research material to fill a dozen academic journals. How? Nice for you, Talzix managed, wondering if the human was deliberately baiting him or truly oblivious to the diplomatic chaos he and his colleagues were causing. I'm particularly interested in speaking with the delegates from Boiling Point. Okafor continued, referring to a planet whose surface was a roiling ocean of superheated liquid ammonia. Their biochemistry might hold the key to developing new thermal regulators for our deep-sea mining operations. There was again that casual reference to exploiting lethal environments for resource extraction, as if extreme conditions were simply engineering challenges rather than natural boundaries. The Boiling Point delegation rarely engages with outsiders, Talzix said stiffly. Their communication methods are challenging. Okafor's face lit up with interest. Oh, how so? They communicate through precisely modulated temperature changes in their external membranes. Our translation systems can interpret basic concepts, but nuanced discussion is nearly impossible. Fascinating, like a biological infrared transmission system. The human pulled out a small device and made some notes. I wonder if we could develop a more sensitive interface. Perhaps using our nanothermal arrays. Talzix felt a headache building at the base of his eye stalks. Dr. Okafor, while your enthusiasm is commendable, perhaps it would be best to focus on the established agenda of the summit. Tomorrow's session on shared environmental threats. Speaking of which, Okafor interrupted, completely missing Talzix's attempt to redirect the conversation. I have been reviewing the data on cosmic radiation surges affecting multiple Deathworld systems. Have your scientists considered using redirected magnetic field generators? We have had success with similar technology protecting our installations on Jupiter's moons. Talzix stared at the human in disbelief. The cosmic radiation crisis had been a subject of intense debate among the Council's top scientific minds for over a decade, with no viable solution in sight. And here was this human, casually suggesting an approach that had apparently never occurred to anyone. That would be a matter for the scientific subcommittee, he said weakly. Of course, I'd be happy to share our findings with them. Would tomorrow afternoon work? I noticed there's a break in the schedule after the morning session. Before Talzix could formulate a response, a commotion erupted from the high-pressure zone at the far end of the hall. A group of delegates were gathered around Captain Jackson, who appeared to be demonstrating some kind of physical technique. As Talzix watched in horror, the human assumed a combat stance, then executed a series of impossibly fast movements that ended with him flipping a graviton delegate, a being evolved for 3 times standard gravity, over his shoulder. Instead of taking offense, the massive graviton bellowed with what sounded like laughter and clapped Jackson on the back hard enough to stagger the human. Jackson merely grinned and took a bow. "Your security specialist seems to be making friends," Okafor noted with amusement. "That's one way of putting it," Talzix said faintly. "Dante has that effect on people." Before joining the diplomatic corps, he was one of Earth's top combat instructors. Specializes in adapting martial arts for varied gravitational conditions. Of course he did. Talzix fought the urge to down another drink. "How versatile. Well, I should circulate," Okafor said cheerfully. "So many fascinating delegates to meet. If you will excuse me, Commissioner." Talzix watched the human make his way toward the boiling point atmospheric chamber, already pulling out what appeared to be a compact environmental suit. "This isn't a summit anymore," he said to no one in particular. "It's a human technological showcase." The next morning's session began promptly at station time 0900. Talzix had barely slept, his dreams haunted by visions of humans in environmental suits swarming across the galaxy, disrupting carefully balanced ecosystems and diplomatic frameworks alike. Today's agenda, he announced to the assembled delegates, tried to ignore the dark circles under his eye stalks, focuses on emerging environmental threats common to multiple Deathworld classifications. We begin with the cosmic radiation surge phenomenon affecting the Galactic Western Spiral Arm. A senior scientist from a methane-breathing Volox took the presentation platform, displaying charts showing increasing radiation levels across dozens of star systems. As you can see, the Volox wheezed through its translation unit. The radiation curve has increased by 0.37% over the past standard year. While this may seem minimal, the cumulative effect over the projected 50-year cycle would render 12 currently habitable planets uninhabitable without significant protective measures. The presentation continued with grim projections of affected worlds and estimated costs of mitigation strategies, none of which appeared particularly promising. Talzix noted with relief that the human delegation was paying close attention without interrupting until the question period. "The floor is now open for inquiries," Talzix announced once the presentation concluded. Ambassador Vance's hand shot up immediately. With a suppressed sigh, Talzix acknowledged her. "The ambassador from Earth is recognized." Vance stood, her posture radiating confidence. "Thank you, Commissioner. I yield my time to Dr. Okafor, who has relevant expertise in this area." Okafor took his colleague's place, activating his personal device, which linked to the chamber's holographic system. Immediately, new images appeared above the assembly, technical diagrams of what appeared to be massive orbital installations. "Esteemed delegates," Okafor began, "what we are facing is essentially a large-scale version of what Earth scientists conquered centuries ago. The radiation surge is similar to what we call solar storms, just on a galactic scale." He manipulated his device, and the diagram expanded to show multiple installations forming a network around a planet. "This is a magnetic redirection array, or MRA. We have used similar technology to protect our settlements on Jupiter's radiation-flooded moons. The principle is straightforward. Create an artificial magnetosphere that can be strengthened or redirected as needed." The hologram simulated the system in action, showing radiation waves being diverted around the protected planet. The beauty of this approach is scalability. A single planet needs only 7 to 12 satellites, depending on size. For a star system, we position larger arrays at strategic Lagrange points. Initial construction costs are high, but operational expenses are minimal as the systems can generate their own power from the very radiation they are diverting. A stunned silence fell over the assembly. Talzix could practically hear the mental calculations being made by delegates from affected worlds. "We have prepared detailed technical specifications," Okafor continued, seemingly oblivious to the sensation he was causing, "which we are happy to share with any interested parties. Earth is also open to discussing manufacturing and implementation partnerships." And there it was. The diplomatic bombshell Talzix had been dreading. The humans weren't just offering a solution. They were offering direct technological and industrial cooperation, completely bypassing the Council's usual role as intermediary and regulator. Before Tal Zix could intervene, the chamber erupted in a cacophony of voices, translator units struggling to keep pace with the sudden flood of questions and comments. Delegates who had barely acknowledged each other's existence during previous summits were now engaged in animated discussions about potential applications of the human technology. "Order!" Tal Zix shouted, his voice amplified by the chamber's systems. "We will maintain proper protocol. Questions will be taken in sequence according to delegation size." His pleas fell on deaf ears, or whatever sensory organs the various species use to detect sound. The carefully orchestrated session had devolved into what humans might call a networking event, with delegates forming impromptu discussion groups centered around the human representatives. Tal Zix slumped in his chair, watching months of planning disintegrate before his eyes. "Should I call a recess?" Pila asked quietly from beside him. "What's the point?" Tal Zix replied, gesturing at the chaos below. "They're not listening anyway." Engineer Tanaka had somehow produced actual physical models of the MRA components and was demonstrating their assembly to a group of technically inclined delegates. Captain Jackson was in deep conversation with representatives from the highest gravity worlds, presumably discussing security implications. And Lucia Reyes, the diplomatic aide who had been virtually silent until now, was moving from group to group, distributing what appeared to be data chips. "What are those?" Tal Zix asked sharply, pointing at the chips. Pila squinted. "They appear to be preliminary technical specifications, and yes, I believe those are draft cooperation agreements." Tal Zix felt his internal temperature regulation system failing. They brought pre-written agreements? This isn't a spontaneous offer. They planned this. It does appear that way. Pila admitted. Something close to panic gripped Tal Zix's hearts. The humans hadn't stumbled into diplomatic chaos. They'd orchestrated it. This wasn't a breach of protocol. It was a calculated disruption of the entire galactic order. "We need to regain control," he said, rising from his chair. "Activate the emergency session termination protocol." Pila looked alarmed. "Sir, that's only for security threats or station emergencies." "This is an emergency," Tal Zix insisted. "The entire foundation of interspecies relations is being rewritten without proper oversight." Before Pila could reply, a new voice cut through the chamber's noise. Ambassador Vance, who had somehow accessed the main communication system. "If I could have everyone's attention," she said, her amplified voice bringing the chaotic discussions to a halt. "In the interest of efficiency, we have prepared a demonstration that may answer many of your questions." The chamber's main view screen activated, showing what appeared to be a space station orbiting a violently stormy planet. "This is Jupiter Station Alpha, one of our first extraterrestrial habitats," Vance explained. "The radiation levels there are lethal to unprotected humans within minutes." What you are seeing is a live feed. The image zoomed in to show humans moving about the station in what appeared to be ordinary clothing. No environmental suits, no obvious protection. "The station is completely shielded by a first-generation MRA," Vance continued. "The technology Dr. Okafor is proposing is 3 generations more advanced. We are not offering theoretical solutions. We are offering proven technology that has allowed us to expand into environments once considered uninhabitable." The view screen split to show multiple similar installations. Orbital platforms around Venus, surface habitats on Mars, mining operations on asteroids with radiation levels that would kill most species instantly. Earth is prepared to share this technology with all members of the Deathworld Alliance, Vance announced. Not as a controlled, licensed technology through council intermediaries, but as a direct partnership between our worlds. And there it was, the diplomatic equivalent of supernova. Vance had just proposed a new power block that would operate outside council jurisdiction, united by shared technological exchange rather than biological compatibility. Tal Zix could only watch as the assembled delegates responded with what could only be described as enthusiasm. The Quartz representatives' crystalline structure was vibrating in what Tal Zix recognized as their version of applause. The methane breathers were releasing celebratory gas puffs. Even a normally stoic Shadow Collective representative seemed to be pulsating with excitement. "What do we do?" Pila whispered, clearly as shocked as Talzix by this turn of events. Before Talzix could answer, his personal communicator chimed with an urgent message. It was from the Galactic Council's Executive Committee, his direct superiors. "We are aware of developments at the summit," the message read. "Do not intervene. Human proposal presents opportunities. Council representatives en route to negotiate formal framework for new alliance structure. Maintain session order, but do not impede discussions." Talzix read the message 3 times, unable to comprehend the implications. The Council wasn't opposing this diplomatic coup, they were adapting to it, racing to remain relevant in a suddenly transformed galactic landscape. He looked up to see Ambassador Vance approaching his platform, that unervingly confident smile still in place. "Commissioner," she said, "I apologize for the disruption to your agenda. Perhaps we should formalize a new schedule that allows for more direct technological and diplomatic exchanges." Talzix stared at the human, seeing her clearly for the first time, not as a biological curiosity from a high-gravity death world, but as the representative of a species that had decided the existing order was simply another obstacle to be engineered around. "You planned this from the beginning," he said, his voice barely audible over the excited chatter filling the chamber. Vance's smile didn't waver. "Let's just say we recognized an opportunity. The Deathworld Summit has always been about survival in extreme conditions. We're simply offering new perspectives on what survival can mean by bypassing centuries of established diplomatic procedure. By introducing a more direct approach," Vance corrected gently. "Commissioner, the old system was designed when interspecies contact was limited by biological incompatibility. But that era is ending. Technology has made it possible for different species to interact in ways previously thought impossible. The diplomatic framework needs to evolve accordingly." Talzix felt a strange calm settle over him, the kind that comes with the recognition of inevitable change. "And I suppose Earth is positioning itself as the facilitator of this evolution," he said. "We prefer to think of it as a partnership," Vance replied. "Every species here has unique insights into survival under extreme conditions. Combined with our adaptive technologies, we can transform environments once considered uninhabitable into new opportunities for all." Talzix noted that she hadn't actually denied his assessment. But before he could press the point, the chamber's communications system chimed with an incoming transmission. "Priority message from Galactic Council Headquarters," the automated system announced. Patching through to main display, the view screen that had just shown the humans' impressive habitats now displayed the imposing visage of High Counselor Vresnorax, the most senior member of the Executive Committee, delegates of the Deathworld Summit. The High Counselor's voice boomed through the chamber. "It has come to our attention that significant technological and diplomatic exchanges are occurring outside established protocols." Talzix felt a surge of vindication. Perhaps the Council had reconsidered its position and decided to reassert control over this chaotic situation. "The Council," Vresnorax continued, "has determined that these developments represent an evolutionary step in interspecies relations. Therefore, we are dispatching a special diplomatic delegation to Vortex Station to formalize a framework for this new Deathworld alliance and integrate it into existing galactic governance structures." Talzix's brief hope collapsed like a neutron star. The Council wasn't stopping the humans. They were legitimizing their diplomatic revolution. "Commissioner Graxvorn," the High Counselor addressed him directly, "you are hereby instructed to facilitate these discussions and extend the summit by an additional 5 days to accommodate the expanded agenda. Council representatives will arrive within 48 hours. The transmission ended before Talzix could respond, leaving him staring at a blank screen while the chamber erupted in renewed excitement. "Well," Ambassador Vance said beside him, her voice carrying a hint of what might have been sympathy, "it looks like we'll be working together more closely than anticipated. For what it's worth, Commissioner, I believe you will find the new arrangement beneficial for all parties." Talzix turned to her, his professional diplomacy finally cracking. Do you have any idea what you have done? The Galactic Order has maintained peace for millennia by carefully managing technological exchange and species interaction. Your direct approach could destabilize everything. Vance's expression grew serious. With respect, Commissioner, stability isn't always progress. The existing system has also prevented countless species from developing solutions to existential threats. How many worlds will be saved by the MRA technology that might have been lost under the old approach? That's not the point, isn't it? Vance interrupted gently. Forgive me, but I have studied your career, Commissioner. Before joining the Diplomatic Corps, you were a xenobiologist specializing in extreme environment adaptation. Your early papers advocated for precisely the kind of cross-species technological exchange we are proposing. What changed? Tal Zix felt as though she had struck him physically. She was right, of course. His youthful idealism had given way to bureaucratic caution over decades in the diplomatic service. Somewhere along the way, maintaining the system had become more important than the innovation he had once championed. The galaxy is more complex than you realize, he said, but the conviction had drained from his voice. Undoubtedly, Vance agreed, which is why we need diverse perspectives and approaches. The Deathworld Alliance isn't about Earth dominating the conversation. It's about creating a platform where species from extreme environments can collaborate directly, combining biological insights with technological solutions. She gestured to the chamber floor, where delegates who had been formal and reserved just yesterday were now engaged in animated exchanges, sharing challenges and possibilities with newfound enthusiasm. Look at them, Commissioner. For the first time, they're not just discussing problems, they are envisioning solutions. Together, Tal Zix did look, and what he saw was undeniable. The artificial barriers that had kept these species in their separate environmental and diplomatic boxes were dissolving. The Shadow Collective representative was actually allowing a quartz delegate to examine its barely visible form. The Boiling Point delegation had extended specialized communication appendages to interface directly with human scanning technology. The IT was chaos. Yes, but perhaps a productive chaos. A creative disruption of an order that, if he was honest with himself, had grown rigid and resistant to change. The Council will want to maintain oversight, he said finally. There are legitimate concerns about unregulated technological proliferation. Of course, Vance nodded. We are not anarchists, Commissioner. Earth recognizes the value of governance structures. But those structures should facilitate progress, not impede it. She extended her hand in the human gesture of agreement. Partners in managing this transition, Tal Zix looked at the offered appendage, then at the transformed assembly before him. The humans had indeed disrupted everything he had worked to maintain. But perhaps they had also broken a stagnation he hadn't fully acknowledged. With a resigned sigh that contained a hint of his old scientific curiosity, he extended his upper right arm and clasped the human's hand. Partners, he agreed, though I suspect I will regret this decision before the summit ends. Vance laughed, a sound like the chiming of crystalline structures in a radiation storm. Unpredictable, but not unpleasant. That's the spirit, Commissioner. Calculated risk-taking is how humans made our death world a home. Now let's see what happens when we combine that approach with the collective wisdom of the galaxy's most extreme survivors. As Tal Zix watched the human return to her colleagues, he couldn't help but wonder if the Galactic Council had made a grave error in inviting humans to the Deathworld Summit, or if perhaps it was the most important decision they had made in centuries. Either way, the galaxy would never be the same. And despite his reservations, a small part of him, the young xenobiologist who had once dreamed of breaking down the barriers between species, was curious to see what would emerge from this new union of Deathworld denizens. After all, if there was one thing the representatives in this chamber understood, it was survival against the odds. With humans added to the mix, those odds had just become wildly unpredictable. He smiled faintly, his eye stalks relaxing for the first time since the humans had arrived. If nothing else, the next few days promised to be the most interesting of his diplomatic career. Junior Officer Pila, he called to his assistant. who was watching the proceedings with undisguised fascination. Yes, Commissioner, update the summit schedule to accommodate the expanded agenda. And he hesitated, then added, requisition additional ethanol-based beverages for the human delegation. I suspect we will all need them before this is over. Pila's facial membranes rippled in what might have been a smile. Right away, sir. And may I say, it's good to see you embracing the change rather than resisting it. Embracing is a strong word, Talzix replied dryly. Let's call it a strategic adaptation to an environmental shift. That is, after all, what this summit is supposed to be about. As he watched the humans continue to captivate their fellow delegates with promises of technologies that could transform lethal environments into habitable frontiers, Talzix couldn't help but reflect on the irony of the situation. The Galactic Council had invited humans to the Deathworld Summit, expecting them to be one more exotic species with unusual survival adaptations. Instead, they had become the catalyst for a fundamental reorganization of galactic politics and technological exchange. Not a big mistake. Perhaps. But as the humans would say, sometimes the biggest mistakes led to the most important breakthroughs. And if there was one thing Deathworld species understood, it was how to turn hostile conditions into opportunities for growth. The diplomatic landscape might be unrecognizable, but the underlying principle remained the same: adapt or perish. The humans had simply expanded the definition of adaptation to include reshaping the environment itself, whether that environment was a planet's surface or the galaxy's political structure. Adaptation, Talzix murmured to himself, watching as Dr. Okafor demonstrated a handheld environmental modifier to an enthralled audience. Perhaps that's what we have been missing all along. With a renewed sense of purpose, he straightened his ceremonial collar and prepared to navigate the transformed diplomatic landscape. The 87th Annual Deathworld Summit had become something entirely unexpected. But then again, that was the nature of Deathworlds. They never quite behaved the way you expected them to, especially when humans were involved.